Have you ever been treated like you were nothing by the people who were supposed to love you most, only to realize years later that you held all the power they never knew about? That's exactly what happened to me. And let me tell you, the moment I revealed the truth at my own uncle's funeral changed everything. I'm standing there in my tailored black suit, the one I bought after closing my third commercial real estate deal, watching my cousins whisper and snicker behind their programs like we're still teenagers at a family barbecue. But we're not kids anymore, and the game has changed in ways they couldn't possibly imagine. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is what I've become, and what they refused to see until it was too late. Growing up, I was always the odd one out in my family. The dreamer, they said, the one with his head in the clouds while everyone else had their feet firmly planted on the ground. My father worked in construction, my uncle ran a small auto repair shop, and my cousins all followed similar blue-collar paths that my family respected and understood. But me? I wanted something different. I wanted to build empires, not just fix cars or lay bricks. Don't get me wrong, there's absolutely nothing wrong with honest work of any kind, but my family saw my ambitions as betrayal, as if wanting more somehow meant I thought I was better than them. The truth is, I never thought I was better. I just knew I was different, and that difference scared them. They mocked me when I spent my evenings reading business books instead of drinking beer with them. They laughed when I took out student loans to study business administration while working 3 part-time jobs. They called me pretentious when I started dressing better, speaking differently, surrounding myself with mentors who had achieved what I wanted to achieve. Every family gathering became a minefield of passive-aggressive comments and thinly veiled insults. My aunt would ask loudly across the dinner table when I was going to get a real job. My cousins would joke about my fancy words and big ideas. My uncle, the one whose funeral I'm now attending, used to say I had champagne tastes on a beer budget, and everyone would laugh like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. But I kept going. I kept pushing. I kept building. Because deep down, beneath all the hurt and rejection, I knew something they didn't. I knew that success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. It's about looking in the mirror and knowing you didn't give up on your dreams just because the people around you couldn't understand them. So I distanced myself, not out of spite, but out of necessity. I couldn't let their negativity poison the seeds I was planting. I couldn't let their limitations become my ceiling. I stopped going to family events. I stopped calling. I stopped trying to make them understand, because I realized I didn't need their approval to succeed. And succeed I did, in ways that would have seemed impossible to that young kid they used to mock. I started small, flipping houses with a partner I met through a real estate investment group. We'd buy distressed properties, renovate them on shoestring budgets, and sell them for profit. It was exhausting, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. I remember the first property we sold, a small 2-bedroom house in a neighborhood that was just starting to turn around. The profit wasn't huge, maybe $15,000 after all expenses, but I felt like I'd won the lottery. That $15,000 became the seed money for the next deal, which became 2 deals, which became 4. Within 3 years, I had enough capital and credibility to move into commercial properties. That's where the real money was, and that's where I found my true calling. There's something powerful about owning the buildings where businesses operate, where families live, where communities gather. You're not just investing in property, you're investing in people's lives and dreams. I bought my first commercial building 7 years ago, a modest 3-story structure with retail space on the ground floor and apartments above. It needed work, a lot of work, but I could see its potential. I could see what it could become. And more importantly, I had finally developed the skills, knowledge, and capital to make that vision a reality. The building was in my hometown, the same town where my family still lived, worked, and yes, rented their homes and businesses. I didn't buy it because of them, I bought it because it was a solid investment in an area I knew intimately. But life has a funny way of creating circles, doesn't it? Have you ever worked so hard for something that when you finally achieved it, you almost couldn't believe it was real? Comment below and tell me about your biggest achievement, because I want to hear your story too. The thing about success is that it's lonely when the people you want to share it with are the same people who doubted you from the start. After I bought that first commercial building, I wanted to call my father. I wanted to tell him that his son, the dreamer, the one with his head in the clouds, had just closed a deal worth over $2 million. I wanted to hear pride in his voice instead of skepticism, but I didn't call. I couldn't bring myself to open that door again, not after all the times it had been slammed in my face. So I celebrated alone, in my small apartment that I was still renting because I was putting every dollar back into my business. I ate Chinese takeout and drank a beer, toasting to myself in the mirror like some kind of lonely lunatic. But even in that solitude, I felt more fulfilled than I'd ever felt at any family gathering, because this was mine. This success was mine. Nobody could take it away or diminish it with their sarcasm and doubt. The months turned into years, and my portfolio grew. I acquired 2 more buildings in town, then expanded to neighboring cities. I developed relationships with property managers, contractors, and other investors. I learned the ins and outs of tenant law, mortgage financing, and property maintenance. I made mistakes, sure, plenty of them, but I learned from each one. There was the time I trusted a contractor who disappeared halfway through a renovation with $30,000 of my money. There was the commercial tenant who filed for bankruptcy, leaving me with months of unpaid rent and legal fees. There were sleepless nights wondering if I'd overextended myself, if I'd made decisions that would bring everything crashing down. But I survived each setback, adapted, and came back stronger. That's what they never understood about me, my family. They saw my dreams as fragile fantasies that would shatter at the first sign of reality. But dreams backed by knowledge, hard work, and persistence aren't fantasies at all. They're blueprints for the future. I was building something real, something tangible, something that would last long after I was gone. Meanwhile, my family's life continued without me. I'd hear things through the grapevine. A cousin got married, another had a baby. My uncle expanded his auto shop. Part of me ached at being excluded from these moments, but a stronger part of me recognized that I'd made a choice, and I had to live with it. You can't have it both ways. You can't let people drag you down and expect to soar at the same time. I ran into my cousin Derek at a gas station about 4 years after I'd started my real estate journey. He barely recognized me at first. I'd lost weight, dressed better, carried myself differently. When he finally realized who I was, his face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and then that familiar condescension I remembered so well. We made awkward small talk. He told me he was managing a restaurant downtown. I didn't tell him I'd just purchased the building his restaurant was in. What would be the point? He asked what I was up to these days, in that tone that suggested he expected to hear I was still struggling, still chasing impossible dreams. I kept it vague, said I was in real estate, doing okay. He nodded like he understood, but his eyes said he didn't believe real estate meant anything significant. He probably pictured me showing houses or answering phones in some agent's office. We parted with hollow promises to get together sometime, both knowing we never would. That encounter stuck with me for weeks. It crystallized something I'd been feeling but couldn't quite articulate. My family didn't just doubt my abilities, they needed me to fail. My failure confirmed their worldview, their choices, their limitations. If I succeeded, it meant they might have been wrong about me, and being wrong about me might mean they were wrong about themselves. That's a mirror most people aren't ready to look into, so they chose not to see me at all. It was easier that way. I became a ghost story in my own family, the cautionary tale about the kid who thought he was too good for everyone else. They had no idea what I'd actually accomplished, because they never asked, and I never told them. Why would I? You don't cast pearls before swine, as the saying goes, not because they're beneath you, but because they'll trample them without recognizing their value. My business continued to grow. I hired a property management company to handle day-to-day operations, which freed me up to focus on acquisitions and strategy. I brought on a business partner, a sharp woman named Jennifer, who had experience in commercial development that complemented my investment knowledge. Together we built something impressive. Our portfolio included mixed-use buildings, apartment complexes, and commercial spaces throughout 3 counties. We weren't billionaires, but we were doing very, very well. I drove a nice car, lived in a beautiful home I'd finally purchased for myself, traveled when I wanted to, and most importantly, I had the freedom to make choices based on what I wanted rather than what I could afford. But success doesn't heal old wounds. It just gives you better tools to manage the pain. I still thought about my family, still wondered what it would be like to have their support and pride. I attended therapy, something else they would have mocked me for, and worked through the complicated feelings of rejection and triumph that tangled together in my chest like barbed wire. My therapist helped me understand that I didn't need their validation, that I was seeking approval from people who were emotionally incapable of giving it. That helped, but it didn't make the longing disappear entirely. Human beings are wired for connection, especially with family, even when that family is toxic. I dated, had relationships, but found it hard to let people truly in. I'd built walls around myself that were higher and thicker than any building I owned. The women I dated would eventually complain that I was emotionally unavailable, that they felt like they were always on the outside looking in. They were right, of course. When you spend years protecting yourself from the people who should have loved you unconditionally, you develop defense mechanisms that don't discriminate between friend and foe. Everyone becomes a potential threat. Everyone becomes someone who might hurt you if you give them the chance. I worked on this in therapy too, slowly learning to be vulnerable again, to trust that not everyone would use my dreams as ammunition against me. It was hard work, harder than any business deal I'd ever negotiated, but I was making progress. I even started dating someone seriously, a teacher named Sarah who was patient with my emotional barriers and seemed to genuinely care about me, not what I'd accomplished or what I owned. She knew about my family situation and encouraged me to reach out, to try building bridges. I resisted at first, but her gentle insistence made me wonder if maybe enough time had passed, if maybe people could change, if maybe I was the one being stubborn now. So I did something I hadn't done in almost 6 years. I called my mother. My hands shook as I dialed the number I'd never forgotten, even though I'd deleted it from my contacts years ago. She answered on the third ring, and the sound of her voice hit me like a physical blow. There was a long pause when I said hello, and I could hear her trying to place the voice. When she finally realized it was me, her tone shifted to something between surprise and caution. We talked for maybe 15 minutes, dancing around real conversation with safe topics like weather and local news. She told me about my cousins, about my aunt's health problems, about my uncle's auto shop doing well. I told her I was doing fine, kept it vague when she asked about my work. At the end of the call, she said I should come to the next family barbecue, that everyone would be happy to see me. I doubted that last part, but I told her I'd think about it. I didn't go to the barbecue. Some wounds are too deep, and I wasn't ready to stand in front of people who'd spent years making me feel worthless, pretending everything was fine. Sarah was disappointed, but understanding. She said I needed to move at my own pace, that forcing reconciliation before I was ready would only cause more harm. She was wise beyond her years, that woman, and I was grateful for her presence in my life. The months continued passing, and I settled into a comfortable rhythm. Business was good, my personal life was improving, and I'd made peace with the family situation, or at least I thought I had. Then, on a Tuesday morning in October, my mother called again. I almost didn't answer. I'd programmed her number into my phone after our last conversation, and seeing her name on the screen made my stomach clench with anxiety. But something made me pick up. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was just timing. Either way, I'm glad I did, even though the news devastated me. My uncle had died, heart attack, sudden and massive. He was only 58 years old. Despite everything, despite the years of mockery and dismissal, despite the distance I'd put between us, I felt genuine grief. He'd been a constant presence in my childhood, teaching me how to change oil in a car, taking me fishing on weekends, making terrible dad jokes that somehow always made me laugh. Before I became the family disappointment, he'd been kind to me in his rough way. The funeral would be Saturday, my mother said. The family hoped I'd come. They wanted me there. I told her I'd be there, and after we hung up, I sat in my home office for an hour, staring at nothing, feeling everything. Death has a way of putting things in perspective, doesn't it? All the petty arguments and hurt feelings seem smaller when someone's gone forever. The drive to the funeral home felt surreal, like I was moving through someone else's life rather than my own. I'd bought a new suit specifically for the occasion, black and perfectly tailored, because appearance matters even when you're mourning, maybe especially when you're mourning in front of people who've spent years judging you. Sarah offered to come with me, to be my support system in what would obviously be an emotionally challenging situation, but I declined. This was something I needed to face alone. Some battles are solitary by nature, and I sensed this would be one of them. The funeral home parking lot was fuller than I expected. My uncle had been well liked in the community, his auto shop serving the town faithfully for over 30 years. He'd been the kind of guy who'd stay late to help someone get their car running, who'd give discounts to customers going through hard times, who'd hire local kids and teach them a trade. Whatever our personal issues, he'd been a good man in many ways, and the turnout reflected that. I took a deep breath before walking in, steeling myself for the reactions my presence would generate. The first person I saw was my cousin Derek, the same one I'd run into at the gas station years earlier. He was greeting people at the entrance, playing the role of dutiful son, though I knew from family gossip that his relationship with his father had been complicated too. When he saw me, his eyes widened in genuine surprise. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out whether to acknowledge me warmly or maintain the family's traditional cool distance. He settled for somewhere in the middle, a brief hug and a mumbled thanks for coming. I moved through the receiving line, offering condolences to family members I hadn't seen in years. Some hugged me, others shook my hand with visible discomfort. All of them seemed shocked that I'd actually shown up. My mother cried when she saw me, pulling me into a tight embrace that felt both familiar and foreign after so much time apart. My father stood behind her, nodding at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Was it respect? Regret? Resignation? Maybe all three. The funeral home was decorated exactly how you'd expect. Lots of flowers, tasteful music playing softly in the background, photographs of my uncle displayed throughout his life, from young man to father to grandfather. I found myself studying these photos, remembering moments captured in them, birthday parties, holidays, fishing trips. There I was in one photo, maybe 10 years old, standing next to my uncle beside a lake, both of us grinning and holding up fish we'd caught. That boy in the photo had no idea how complicated his life would become, how much distance would eventually separate him from the man standing beside him. I found a seat toward the back of the room, not wanting to draw attention but needing to be present. Other attendees filtered in, friends of my uncle, business associates, community members. I recognized some faces from around town, others were strangers to me. The service began with typical funeral proceedings, a pastor speaking about life and death and eternal rest, family members sharing memories and stories, a slideshow of photographs accompanied by soft music. My uncle's life was celebrated in all the expected ways, and it was genuinely moving. He'd lived a full life, maybe not the kind of life I wanted for myself, but a good life nonetheless, one that mattered to the people around him. Then came the part I'd been dreading, the informal gathering after the service, where people milled around sharing food and memories, where I'd have to navigate conversations with family members who'd written me off years ago. I gravitated toward the refreshment table, using coffee as a prop to occupy my hands and give me something to focus on besides the awkward tension. That's when my cousin Marcus approached me. Marcus had always been the most vocal about my choices, the one who seemed personally offended by my ambitions. He'd dropped out of high school to work in my uncle's shop, and while he was talented with engines, he'd never had much patience for education or what he called book learning. Marcus looked me up and down with obvious disdain, taking in my expensive suit, my polished shoes, the watch on my wrist that probably cost more than his car. I could see judgment forming in his eyes before he even opened his mouth. "Hey there, Mr. Big Shot," he said loud enough for nearby family members to hear. "Glad you could tear yourself away from your important life to join us regular folk." His tone was aggressive, challenging, looking for a fight. I kept my voice level and calm. I came to pay my respects to my uncle Marcus, same as everyone else here. He snorted, "Right. Pay your respects." Where were those respects for the last 6 years when you couldn't be bothered to call or visit? Where were you when Dad was sick last year? When Cousin Jenny lost her job? When any of us needed anything? You were too busy being successful to give a damn about your family. Other family members started gathering around us, sensing confrontation. Part of me wanted to walk away, to refuse to engage with his aggression, but another part of me, the part that had been carrying hurt and anger for years, decided it was time to speak up. I didn't abandon this family, Marcus. I removed myself from a toxic environment where I was constantly belittled and mocked for wanting more out of life. There's a difference. His face reddened. Toxic? We were honest with you. We tried to give you a reality check instead of feeding your delusions. And look at you now, standing here in your fancy suit, probably driving some overpriced car, acting like you're better than all of us. Is that what success looks like? Becoming someone who forgets where they came from? The funeral home had gone quiet now. Everyone was watching our exchange, some with morbid curiosity, others with obvious discomfort. This was not the time or place for such a confrontation, but sometimes moments choose themselves rather than being chosen. "I don't think I'm better than anyone here," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "I think I'm different. I wanted different things and I worked hard to achieve them. The fact that you couldn't understand or support that says more about you than it does about me." Marcus's wife put a hand on his arm, trying to pull him back, but he shook her off. "Support you? Support what? Your arrogance? Your pretentiousness? You walked away from real work to play around with whatever the hell it is you do. Real estate, right? Probably showing houses to rich people, kissing up to them, pretending you're one of them." That's when something inside me snapped. Not in an explosive way, but in a quiet, definite way. I was done defending myself. I was done feeling ashamed of my success. I was done letting these people make me feel small. "Actually, Marcus, I don't show houses. I own them. I own buildings. Commercial properties, apartment complexes, retail spaces. I own the building where Derek's restaurant operates. I own the strip mall where Jenny works. And I own the building where your auto repair shop is located, the one you rent month to month. I am your landlord, Marcus. I have been for the past 3 years." The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that funeral home. Faces around me registered shock, disbelief, confusion. Marcus stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, trying to process what I'd just said. "What the hell are you talking about?" he finally managed. I pulled out my phone, opened my property management app, and turned the screen toward him. Right there in black and white was his business name, his rental address, his monthly payment history. Every payment he'd made for the past 3 years had gone into my bank account. He'd been paying me this entire time without knowing it. "You're lying," he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "I'm not lying. The property management company handles all tenant communications, so you've never dealt with me directly. But I'm the owner. I've been the owner since before you moved your shop into that space." I watched as the information sank in, not just for Marcus, but for the other family members gathered around us. My cousin Derek pulled out his own phone, presumably to check his lease agreement. My aunt covered her mouth with her hand. My father stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. "Do you want to know the really interesting part?" I continued, my voice calm, but carrying to every corner of the now silent room. "You've been late on rent 9 times in 3 years. Every single time I instructed the management company to waive the late fees. When you had that slow month last winter and asked for a payment extension, that came from me. I approved it. When you needed repairs to the HVAC system and wondered why the landlord fixed it so quickly at no cost to you, that was me. I took care of it, because despite everything, despite how you've treated me, you're still family." Marcus's face had gone from red to pale. The anger drained out of him, replaced by something that looked like humiliation mixed with confusion. Around us, other family members were having their own realizations. I could see them doing the mental math, figuring out that if I owned these properties, I wasn't just doing okay, I was doing very well. The narrative they'd built about me, the failure, the pretender, the dreamer who couldn't make it in the real world, was crumbling before their eyes. "Why didn't you tell us?" my mother asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What would have been the point?" I asked, looking at her directly. "When I tried to share my dreams with you, I was mocked. When I talked about my goals, I was told to be realistic. When I started to succeed, I was already so distant from this family that sharing my achievements would have felt like rubbing your faces in it. I didn't want that. I just wanted to live my life and build my success without constantly having to defend it to people who were determined not to believe in me. But you let us think," my father started. "I let you think what you were already thinking," I interrupted. "I didn't create the narrative that I was a failure. You did. All of you did. You decided who I was and what I would become, and nothing I said or did would change your minds. So I stopped trying to change them. I focused on building my life instead of fighting for your approval." The gathering had completely transformed. The funeral, the reason we were all there, had been momentarily forgotten in the wake of these revelations. People whispered to each other, checking their phones, making connections they'd never made before. Someone said my name followed by a question mark, like they were asking if they'd ever really known me at all. Derek walked up to me slowly, his phone still in his hand. "You're really our landlord. You own our buildings." I nodded. "Among others. I have a portfolio of properties throughout the region. It's what I do. It's what I've been doing while you all assumed I was struggling or failing or whatever story made you feel better about dismissing me." His expression was complicated, a mixture of emotions I couldn't fully parse. There wasn't quite an apology there, but there was something, maybe the beginning of understanding or the recognition of a profound misjudgment. "I'm sorry," he said finally. Those two words hung in the air. They weren't enough, couldn't possibly be enough to make up for years of derision and rejection, but they were a start. I nodded, acknowledging them without quite accepting them. My aunt approached next, tears streaming down her face. She'd been one of the worst offenders, constantly making comments about my life choices, my education, my refusal to settle for what she considered acceptable work. Seeing her cry made me uncomfortable, because I didn't want to be the cause of anyone's pain, even hers. "I never knew," she said between sobs. "We never knew you'd actually done it. You actually became successful." The way she said it, with such surprise, such disbelief, crystallized everything that had been wrong with our relationship. She couldn't conceive of a world where I succeeded because she'd so completely committed to the narrative of my failure. Even now, standing in front of undeniable proof, she seemed shocked that I'd proven her wrong. "Success isn't about proving anyone wrong," I told her gently. "It's about proving yourself right. I didn't do this to spite you or to show off. I did it because I believed in myself even when nobody else did. That belief sustained me through incredibly difficult times, through moments when I wanted to give up, when the obstacles seemed insurmountable. I kept going because I had to, because the alternative was living a life that wasn't mine." The funeral director appeared, politely suggesting we take our conversation outside or to a private room, reminding us with his presence that we were still at a funeral, that there was still grief to process and a life to honor. We moved to a small side room, several family members following, everyone wanting to be part of this conversation that was rewriting years of family history. In that smaller space with fewer witnesses, the questions came flooding out. "How long have you owned these properties? What else do you own? Why did you keep it secret? Are you rich? Do you hate us?" That last question came from my younger cousin Sarah, who'd been just a kid when I left and was now a young woman I barely recognized. She asked it with such genuine concern, such vulnerability, that it cut through my defensive walls. "I don't hate any of you," I said honestly. "I'm hurt by you. I'm disappointed by you. I'm sad about the relationship we could have had but didn't, because you couldn't see past your own limitations and fears. But hate? No. Hate requires energy. I'd rather invest in building than tearing down." My father finally spoke up, his voice rough with emotion I'd rarely heard from him. "I was wrong about you, son. I thought I was protecting you from disappointment, from chasing dreams that would break your heart. I see now that I was really protecting myself from the possibility that you might succeed in ways I never did, that you might prove that limitations I'd accepted weren't limitations at all, but choices." Hearing my father admit fault, hearing him acknowledge his mistakes broke something open inside me. Tears I'd been holding back for years pushed against my eyes, and I didn't try to stop them. I'd spent so long being strong, being independent, proving I didn't need them, that I'd forgotten how much I actually wanted their recognition, their pride, their love. We talked for over an hour in that small room, not solving everything, not healing every wound, but starting a conversation that should have happened years ago. They asked about my business, and I told them, not bragging but informing, helping them understand what I actually did. They shared their own struggles, their own fears, their own regrets about how things had unfolded. It wasn't forgiveness yet, not complete reconciliation, but it was honest communication, and that felt revolutionary after so many years of silence and assumptions. Marcus apologized again, more sincerely this time. He admitted that my success had always threatened him because it highlighted choices he hadn't made, paths he hadn't taken. If I could succeed by going against the family grain, what did that say about his decision to follow it? It meant he couldn't blame circumstances or family expectations or bad luck for where he'd ended up. He had to take ownership of his choices, and that was uncomfortable. Eventually, we returned to the main room where my uncle's service had concluded, and people were preparing to leave. The rest of the funeral passed in a blur of emotional exhaustion and tentative new connections. Family members who'd ignored me for years suddenly wanted to talk, to exchange phone numbers, to promise they'd stay in touch this time. I accepted their overtures with cautious optimism, knowing that real change takes time and consistent effort, not just good intentions born from shock and revelation. Sarah, my girlfriend, texted me during the reception asking how I was doing. I stepped outside to call her, needing to hear a friendly voice that wasn't complicated by years of family baggage. I told her everything, and she listened without judgment, offering support and understanding. She reminded me that healing is a process, that I shouldn't expect too much too fast from people who were still processing their own mistakes and misconceptions. Her wisdom grounded me, helped me maintain perspective on what had just happened. When I went back inside, I found my mother sitting alone, staring at photos of my uncle from when we were all younger, when families seemed simpler and relationships less fraught. I sat beside her, and for a while we didn't speak, just shared the silence and the grief and the complicated feelings that come with losing someone while simultaneously rediscovering others. Eventually, she asked me about my life, really asked, with genuine interest rather than polite obligation. So I told her. I told her about the properties I'd acquired, the challenges I'd overcome, the lessons I'd learned. I told her about Sarah, about the life I'd built, about the person I'd become. She listened with tears streaming down her face, occasionally reaching over to squeeze my hand. When I finished, she said something that surprised me. "I'm proud of you. I should have said it years ago, every year, every day. But I'm saying it now because it's true and because you deserve to hear it." Those words, so simple, so overdue, meant more than any property deed or bank statement. They represented a shift in how she saw me, and maybe more importantly, a shift in how she saw herself as a mother. We'd both failed each other in different ways over the years, but maybe we could do better moving forward. The days following the funeral were strange. My phone rang constantly with calls from family members wanting to talk, to apologize, to rebuild bridges they'd helped burn. Some conversations went well. Others remained awkward and stilted, evidence that good intentions alone can't immediately overcome years of damaged relationships. I met Derek for coffee, and we talked honestly about our shared history and divergent paths. He admitted he'd been jealous of my ambition even while mocking it, that he'd felt stuck in his own life and resented that I'd found a way to become unstuck. We didn't become best friends overnight, but we established a foundation for something better than what we'd had. Marcus took longer to come around. Pride is a powerful force, and admitting you've been completely wrong about someone for years requires swallowing a massive amount of it. We eventually had a tense lunch where he apologized again, this time with more depth and self-awareness. He acknowledged that he'd projected his own insecurities onto me, that my success forced him to confront choices he'd made and roads he hadn't taken. I respected his honesty, and we agreed to start fresh, to build whatever relationship felt authentic rather than forcing something that wasn't there. My relationship with my parents improved gradually. We started having weekly phone calls where they'd ask about my week and actually listen to the answers. They met Sarah, and my mother immediately loved her, seeing in her the stable, grounding presence I needed. My father asked me to teach him about real estate investing, saying he had some money saved and wanted to learn. This request meant everything because it showed he now valued my expertise, saw me as someone with knowledge worth learning, rather than someone with delusions worth dismissing. But not everything resolved neatly. Some family members remained distant, either from embarrassment about how they'd treated me, or from continued resentment that I'd achieved success they couldn't understand. My uncle's death, the catalyst for this entire revelation and reconciliation, left a hole that our improving relationships couldn't quite fill. I wished he could have lived to see this shift, to know that his death had somehow brought healing to rifts he'd contributed to creating. I found myself thinking about legacy during those weeks after the funeral. What do we leave behind when we're gone? My uncle left a successful business, a large family, a good reputation in the community, but he also left unresolved conflicts and damaged relationships that only death could begin to heal. What would I leave? Money and properties were fine, but they weren't enough. I wanted to leave something more meaningful, relationships that didn't require my death to improve, a family that supported each other not because of obligation or guilt, but because of genuine love and respect. This realization led me to make some changes in my life. I started being more present with family, attending events I would have previously avoided, making efforts to connect that felt uncomfortable at first, but grew more natural over time. I established a family scholarship fund for any family member who wanted to pursue education or start a business, wanting to help others achieve their dreams the way I'd achieved mine. I met with Marcus and offered to mentor him in expanding his business, showing him how he could own his building rather than rent it, Not everyone accepted these overtures. Some remained suspicious of my motives, wondering if I was showing off or trying to buy back their good opinion. But many did accept, and slowly, painfully, our family began to resemble something healthier than it had been in years. Sarah and I got engaged 6 months after the funeral. When I told my family, they celebrated genuinely, asking to be involved in wedding planning, offering help and support that felt real rather than obligatory. My mother cried happy tears, saying she'd worried I'd never let anyone close enough to build a life with them. She wasn't wrong. I'd been emotionally closed off for years, but I was learning to open up, to trust that not everyone would use my vulnerabilities as weapons. The wedding was small but meaningful, held at a beautiful venue that I purchased specifically for the occasion, a former warehouse I'd converted into an event space. My father walked me down the aisle, an untraditional choice that felt right for us, symbolizing that we'd both made journeys to get to this point and were walking forward together into something new. Marcus gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry, acknowledging our troubled history while celebrating our current friendship. It wasn't perfect. None of this was perfect, but it was real, and it was ours. Looking back on that funeral, on the moment when I revealed the truth about my success and my role in their lives, I see it as a turning point, not just for me, but for my entire family. Sometimes people need to see concrete evidence of what they've missed, what they've misjudged, before they can begin to change their perspectives. My success, revealed at that specific moment in that specific context, served as an undeniable mirror, forcing them to confront their prejudices and mistakes. But here's what I've learned through all of this. Success means nothing if it's lonely. Achieving your goals, building your empire, proving everyone wrong, these things feel hollow when you have nobody to share them with, nobody who truly knows you and celebrates you. I spent years building financial success while neglecting emotional connections, and while I don't regret my path, I recognize now that both are necessary for a truly fulfilling life. I also learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting or excusing what happened. It's about releasing the hold that past hurts have on your present life. I'm still working on forgiveness, both forgiving my family for their treatment of me and forgiving myself for cutting them off so completely. The journey continues, and I'm learning that success isn't a destination you reach, but a process you live every single day. It's about making choices aligned with your values, treating people with dignity even when they haven't treated you the same way, and building something meaningful that extends beyond your own life. My business continues to grow, but these days I measure success differently. Yes, I look at profit margins and property values, but I also look at relationships healed, bridges rebuilt, and family connections strengthened. Have you ever been in a situation where people completely underestimated you, only to be shocked when they discovered the truth about what you'd achieved? Maybe you've worked in silence, building something amazing while others doubted or dismissed you. Maybe you've had to distance yourself from toxic people, even family, to protect your dreams and your mental health. Maybe you've experienced that bittersweet moment when people who hurt you suddenly want to be part of your life because they finally see your worth. If any of this resonates with you, I want to hear your story. Drop a comment below and tell me about your experience. Tell me about the dreams you're chasing, the obstacles you're overcoming, the people who doubt you, and the moments when you prove them wrong. Your story matters, and sharing it might inspire someone else who's struggling right now, who's wondering if they should give up on their dreams because the people around them don't believe. Don't give up. Please don't give up. I almost did, so many times. There were nights when I lay awake wondering if everyone was right, if I was fooling myself, if I should just accept a more conventional path that would at least earn me acceptance from my family. But something kept pushing me forward, some stubborn refusal to let other people's limitations define my possibilities. That stubbornness saved me, transformed me, led me to a life beyond anything I could have imagined when I was that young kid being mocked at family gatherings. The truth is, some of the greatest success stories come from people who were underestimated, dismissed, or written off by those around them. Being underestimated can actually be an advantage, because it means people aren't watching your every move, aren't trying to sabotage your efforts, aren't putting pressure on you to succeed according to their timeline and definitions. You get to work in relative peace, building your foundation, learning your lessons, making your mistakes without an audience critiquing your every decision. Then when you're ready, when you've built something real and substantial, You emerge and people are shocked because they weren't paying attention. They were so convinced of your failure that they missed your success entirely. That shock, that moment of revelation, can be deeply satisfying, but it can also be an opportunity for growth and reconnection if you choose to use it that way. I chose to use my revelation as a bridge rather than a weapon. Yes, I was hurt and angry. Yes, I wanted them to know what they'd missed, what they'd been wrong about. But more than revenge or vindication, I wanted healing. I wanted a family that could celebrate each other's successes rather than feeling threatened by them. I wanted relationships based on who we actually are rather than who we assumed each other to be. That takes work from everyone involved, takes humility and honesty and a willingness to admit mistakes. Not everyone in my family was capable of that work, and I've had to accept that some relationships will remain distant or damaged, but many were capable, and those relationships have become sources of genuine joy and support in my life. If you're watching this and you're in a similar situation, I want to offer you some specific advice based on what I've learned. First, never let other people's doubts become your own. Their inability to see your potential says nothing about your actual potential, only about their vision and their limitations. Keep working, keep believing, keep building, even when nobody else believes with you. Second, success on other people's terms is still failure if it doesn't align with your authentic self and your genuine dreams. Don't chase achievements just to prove people wrong. Chase them because they matter to you, because they represent the life you actually want to live. Third, remember that distance from toxic people, even family, isn't betrayal or abandonment, it's self-preservation, and it's necessary sometimes. You can love people from a distance while still protecting your peace and your progress. Fourth, when you do achieve success, measure it by your own standards, not by other people's reactions to it. I felt successful long before my family knew about my achievements because I was living according to my values and reaching goals that mattered to me. Their eventual recognition was nice, but it wasn't what made my success real. And finally, stay open to reconciliation, but don't make it your mission or your measure of worth. Some people will come around, others won't, and both outcomes say more about them than about you. Your worth isn't determined by who recognizes it, it's inherent to who you are and what you've accomplished. I want to emphasize something really important here. The goal of sharing my story isn't to encourage you to cut off your family or to suggest that success is only valid if it shocks people who doubted you. The goal is to encourage you to believe in yourself fiercely, to work toward your dreams relentlessly, and to build a life that feels authentic and fulfilling regardless of who supports you along the way. Family reconciliation, if it happens, should be a bonus, not the ultimate prize. If you found value in this story, if it made you think or feel or reconsider something in your own life, please hit that like button below. It really helps the channel, and it lets me know that these kinds of honest, vulnerable stories resonate with you. I don't take it for granted that you spent this time listening to my experience, and I want to create more content that serves you, that helps you navigate your own challenges and dreams. Make sure you're subscribed to my Truth Revealed Tales, because we share real stories from real people, dealing with real situations. Life is messy and complicated and beautiful and hard, and we're here to explore all of that together. These aren't made-up stories or fictional accounts. These are genuine experiences that people like you and me have lived through, and there's power in knowing you're not alone in your struggles or your triumphs. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. We post regularly, and you never know which story might be exactly what you need to hear on a particular day. Maybe it'll be about overcoming addiction, or rebuilding after divorce, or starting over in a new career, or healing from childhood trauma, or any number of human experiences we all navigate in different ways. Before you go, I want to leave you with one final thought. The funeral, the revelation, the family dynamics, all of that was dramatic and made for an interesting story, but the real transformation happened in the quiet moments nobody saw. It happened in the late nights when I studied while exhausted. It happened in the early mornings when I pushed through doubt and fear to make another phone call or view another property. It happened in the moments when I chose my dreams over comfort, when I invested in myself, rather than spending money on things that would impress others, when I showed up for myself consistently, even when nobody else was watching. That's where real success is built, in those unglamorous, unsexy, difficult moments of choice and commitment. The revelation at the funeral was just the curtain being pulled back to show work that had been happening all along. So whatever your dream is, whatever your goal, start doing the unglamorous work today. Start showing up for yourself in those quiet moments. Start making choices that align with your authentic aspirations rather than other people's expectations. Start building the foundation that will support the life you want to live. And remember, you don't need anyone's permission or approval to pursue your dreams. You don't need to wait for perfect circumstances or universal support. You need to believe in yourself enough to take the first step, and then the next step, and then the next. Thank you for being here, for listening, for engaging with this story. Now it's your turn. Go out there and write your own success story. And when you do, come back and share it with us. We'll be here celebrating with you.